And we do, I think, represent amateur radio well everywhere, as I said before. So, would any of you guys like to say anything?
Actually, I would, Bob.
Yes, please.
And when let's finish up, I have a presentation.
Oh.
Don't forget. I won't do that right now.
You don't want to.
I just want to give you all a little insider trading about some regulatory things that are coming up on the near horizon. A lot of people, first of all, think that the BPL wars are over and that we won. Well, it isn't over and we haven't won yet. The FCC has had circulating among the 5 commissioners since June a draft report and order that will address the further notice of proposed rulemaking that the Court of Appeals in Washington ordered FCC to issue, reconsidering the rules that it adopted after the Court of Appeals reversed FCC's first set of BPL rules as having been adopted under, shall we say, questionable circumstances. We really did. Bob was talking about spending your membership money. We spent a lot of money on the BPL battle, and if we don't get some revised rules out of the FCC that better protect amateur radio against interference in the HF bands from broadband over power line systems, we won't have won anything, and we will have spent about $350,000 of your money for no useful purpose at the end of the day. I don't know what this order says, what this draft report and order says. I'm hoping that it will say that amateur radio allocations will be protected to either 30 or 35 dB of notching that would be mandatory in all amateur allocations below 30 megahertz all the time. That's one of the base level items that if we don't get, we can't really declare victory. The other is an extrapolation standard for how fast the BPL signals decay with distance from overhead power lines. The FCC adopted a 40 dB per decade of distance extrapolation factor when we believe that the science shows that the BPL signals diminish at more like a 20 dB per decade of distance rate. That is, if you go from 3 meters from the power line to 30 meters from the power line, that's a decade of distance, and we believe that the signals don't decay anywhere near as fast as the FCC said they did, and that they adopted false science. We're not sure when this FCC order is going to be released. It does have one commissioner's signature on it, and we're going to make another round of visits among the commissioners to try to ensure that we get something useful out of this report and order. We've filed paper like you wouldn't believe in the last 2 years. It's been since the Court of Appeals sent this case back to FCC. And lest you think that there aren't any BPL systems around anymore, there are. There's a company called IBEC that's deployed substantial numbers of systems in the East and the Midwest. And the Utilities Telecom Council is still talking about smart grid control using broadband over power line systems for controlling the power grid. We're not out of the woods on that yet. There is also an order circulating at the FCC that should be released probably in the next month or two that's going to change a little bit the 5 channels that we have at 5 megahertz. One of those, the order is going to say, and I'm quite sure I know what it's going to say, one of the 5 channels receives a lot of interference because there's a government station on an adjacent channel that uses a wider bandwidth than normal, and so we're getting government interference on this one 5 megahertz, 2.8 kilohertz bandwidth channel. That's going to be replaced with one that doesn't have interference, courtesy of the feds, and we're going to get a power increase to 100 watts, and you're going to be able to use Pactor 3, PSK 31, and CW, in addition to SSB on those channels, again by agreement of NTIA. The only fly in the ointment is that for no really good reason, NTIA insisted that there be only one amateur emission per station on each channel at a time. So in other words, even though you have a 2.8 kilohertz channel bandwidth, there can only be one ham transmitting one CW signal at a time. Now, everybody knows that propagation variations don't really mean that you can only have one QSO going on per channel at one time. But they don't want more than one emission per amateur transmitter per channel at any one given time, which decreases the efficiency of the use of those channels if you're using PSK 31 or CW. The last thing that's on the near horizon coming from FCC that you'll see in the next few months, I believe, isn't favorable at all. The FCC has told the Europeans that there will be authorized in the United States medical body-worn telemetry networks for patient monitoring over short distances, not only in healthcare facilities but in some home care situations, authorized in the 2360 to 2400 megahertz band. That band, as you will remember, includes the amateur primary 2390 to 2400 megahertz range, and we're really not using that band to any great effectiveness. And that's unfortunate because it's worth literally billions of dollars, and we're a little worried about our ability to protect that band against reallocation for broadband, which FCC's hell-bent to do. The National Broadband Plan calls for the allocation of 500 megahertz of spectrum for broadband over the next 10 years, well now 9 years. And we're analyzing all of the amateur allocations between about 200 megahertz and 4 gigahertz. Yeah, that's an appropriate alarm to be sounded. The National Broadband Plan has some targeted bands, one of which is our 3300 to 3500 megahertz band, which we don't use very much as well. But 2390 to 2400 megahertz is a target band for broadband reallocation, and we're thinking that although we opposed having medical body area networks at 2390 to 2400 megahertz, not because they're going to cause a lot of interference to amateur radio, but because amateur radio operators might interfere with those, and nobody wants to be responsible for that. They claim that the systems, Philips Healthcare and GE Healthcare claim that those systems will be impervious to amateur radio interference, but we don't believe it. There may be some more regulatory proceedings dealing with that, but the FCC has told the Europeans they're coming up with that very soon. So be on the lookout, and rest assured we will continue to advocate your interests there. I think that's all I wanted to update you all about right now. Yeah?
I'm new to this. I have kind of a fuzzy, I'm literally your layperson on the street. I don't have one of your fortunate little things. I'm a Mrs. whatever his code thing is.
Well, welcome.
Thank you. But I've had concerns about things like this socially since I was younger, and what I'm hearing from you, even though I don't understand all the detail of what you just said, what I am hearing as a layperson is, you've got airwaves running around out here that are allocated, or somebody somewhere says, okay, you can work on this one, you can work on that one, and you pay us fees for essentially something to me that should be free. But at the same time, they're saying, you know, we don't want you to use it for this reason, that reason, and I'm hearing shrinkage happening. Is that exactly what you're talking about as far as the legalities and the bandwidth they're permitting you to operate on? Because that's distressing.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I used to work with a guy named Paul Rinaldo before RI, and he was a dear friend of mine, and still is. He's retired now. But he he was the technical relations manager of ARRL and the chief technology officer for many years. Brilliant guy, honestly. And he said, look, let's sit down and put together a list of bands of amateur allocations, amateur chunks of spectrum that we have that are being threatened. And so we can brief the board of directors about the current level of threats to amateur bands. And we sat down and we started going through the bands one at a time. And we quickly realized that there aren't any that aren't threatened. And that's generally true at any given time, and it's been true for all of the 32 years I've been working with the ARRL. It's frustrating, but probably in the last 10 or 15 years, there's been a realization of the value for other radio applications of the radio spectrum. Right now, the focus is on the intense value of the lower microwave bands between about 900 megahertz and about 5 gigahertz. If the FCC were to auction off our 2390 to 2400 megahertz segment, which we don't use very much, and honestly, I mean, I'd only want to talk about that in a room like this, but it's true, and it's no secret, and the FCC knows that, and we get to use the bands we use because we're a good public trustee and we provide valuable emergency communications and international relations type communications, and we advance the radio art. That's our contribution, but other radio services want spectrum to make a lot of money. And in order to do that, the FCC and the Congress have decided, gee, we ought to share in a little of that. And the National Broadband Plan says, here's our plan for raising a whole bunch of money for the federal government. So that's that's the biggest threat we've ever had, is this major broadband reallocation. Yes,
sir? This whole thing should be changed back where the FCC is funded out of the general fund and they're not the profit-making business. They're a watchdog like they used to be, so I think a lot of changes need to be done.
Well, you're absolutely right. There's been talk over the years of merging the FCC in with the Commerce Department, with the NTIA. But really, FCC among the federal agencies is quite popular with Congress because they make back virtually their entire budget through regulatory fees and a combination of regulatory fees and application fees. Now, we don't pay the regulatory fees except that we pay a use fee for a vanity call sign. And over the years, we've fought off application fees and spectrum use fees and this and that. But virtually every other service, except non-commercial FM broadcast radio and things like that, virtually every other RF user pays some sort of regulatory fee. Now, it's supposed to be tied to the cost of regulating the service by the FCC, but when you're looking at trying to balance the federal budget, that's a pretty popular concept up on Capitol Hill if an agency can kind of run itself on the backs of the industry that it regulates. Whether you think that's a good idea is really more of a political question, but absolutely some FCC reform is necessary, and it's probably way overdue.
Just one other quick loaded question, possibly. The band you said that's not being used efficiently or enough or whatever, I understand that part, but just in that. What can somebody do, meaning anyone who can affect it, do to raise that to where they can see that we're going to upset a lot of people because it's being used? What can you do to use it? How can we implement somebody, lay people, whatever, to increase the volume to where they would be afraid to touch it?
Well, that's a wonderful question. It's actually the same question we've been asking ourselves in a committee that ARRL set up to analyze both the threats based on to our allocations based on the National Broadband Plan, and to come up with strategies to address them, those threats. And we presented to Bob and his fellow directors in July a 55-page report itemizing, analyzing the threats to the amateur allocations and the subject bands that that we think are in jeopardy of being reallocated for broadband use. And the second half of that charge is to develop the strategies. And so we're trying to answer the questions right now that you've asked. And there are a lot of answers. One answer is that a lot of the allocations that are being threatened are shared with the United States government. The United States government, the federal agencies, Department of Defense especially, the Air Force, the Navy and the Coast Guard and the Department of Justice, they all utilize the same bands that we do, up above about 225 megahertz. So that makes a pretty good, amateur radio together with these federal agencies make a pretty good team to try to defend these bands. The feds are very happy with us. We get along just like pigs and slop. But the agencies don't want to lose this spectrum, and they're not being very adequately protected by NTIA, because NTIA is not only the advocate for federal agencies, it's also the advocate for the administration. And the administration wants to see a lot of revenue from a lot of auction spectrum for a lot of broadband.
Isn't that a conflict of interest just in the description?
Yes.
Yeah, well, yeah, it is. They have conflicting goals, and oftentimes, you know, they'll fall on one side or the other, and you know, and really disserve the other half of their obligation. There's no doubt about that. But you know, you raise a very, very good question. What can we do? Forming alliances with the federal agencies that we share spectrum with is a good strategy, but that's just one. We have about 10 or 11. We can argue what's next door. What are the adjacent bands being used for, and how will they be affected if our bands are reallocated for broadband use? Another good potential strategic defense. But you've got a committee of, we think, experts working on that, and by the end of the year, we should have a series of strategies ready to implement, not all of which involve a lot of cost, but that we'll be ready to go with as soon as the ARRL Board of Directors approves them. And we think that they're going to be effective in protecting a lot of the bands that are being threatened.
Yeah, I had a question. Yeah, that band we're talking about is right against ISM, but I don't let's not talk about that. But I was wondering, who are the commercial entities that are pushing BPL right now?
Well, there aren't as many as there used to be. The principal enemy is the same one we've had all along, Utilities Telecom Council. It's an association of utilities, electric utilities typically. And they're still very interested in the smart grid control, as I mentioned before. They had a sort of a subsidiary association that they formed back when they thought that this was a wonderful way to provide broadband to everybody. And when the FCC was touting this as the third pipeline into the home, UTC thought, oh gee, we have a gold mine here. We're going to be the association of BPL companies. And most of the BPL companies have gone on to other things. Current Technologies was one of the biggest ones and one of the biggest headaches that we had, because they, among almost uniquely among the BPL companies, had a very competent communications attorney who was always a thorn in our side. I call him the lizard.
Yep. And
now I can't identify him because, you know, I can't really professionally do that. But I call him the lizard for good and sufficient reason. Trust me on that. But that company, Current Technologies, is out of the BPL business. About the only active one right at the moment is, oh gee, I'm drawing a blank here. It's a company that we thought used a technology that was benign toward amateur radio, and it's not. It's proven to be, they don't have in place the notches in the amateur bands that they said they did. There's a lot of home plug standard devices around. That's all over the place, and that's not deteriorated at all. That's the in-house BPL. But that's never really been a problem, because we've worked with them. Ed Hare at ARRL headquarters has worked with them for years, and they have they've always notched amateur radio allocations, and standard, the home plug standard, the companies that utilize the home plug standard for in-house BPL has proven absolutely benign toward amateur radio. But that's all over the place, and that use is increasing. It's the access BPL, the overhead power line BPL, that's really decreased somewhat. I mean, it's a failed concept in the marketplace. But as I understand it, in order for access BPL to work, it has to run hot every single time. And the IDEC, the IBEC system that has a number of deployments around, always has been found, every time we've investigated it, to be running really, really hot. And we filed complaints with FCC of actual interference from IBEC systems. We have one pending now in Southern Virginia, down near Blacksburg, which is the other technology area other than here. And Blacksburg, Virginia is a good test area for technology deployments, and a BPL system down there has caused actual interference to amateurs recently because of the failure to notch the amateur bands. And FCC still doesn't want to do anything to enforce its own rules. Even the inadequate rules that they've adopted, they won't enforce. So this is, it's a big frustration for us, and it's still very much of an issue. I've been talking way too much, but I'll take one more question here.
Isn't the BPL issue also tied up with government usage, because a lot of these so-called notches also affect government usage, and despite that, BPL is not going to shut down? So
well,
the point being, just because the government is being interfered with, you can't count on their help.
That's a good argument, but this is one of those situations that we just talked about where NTIA has been reflecting the administration, at least the previous administration's viewpoint about BPL. There really hasn't been anything since the Obama administration came in, because really I think NTIA is feeling a little sheepish about all the bragging about BPL they were doing, and then it kind of fell off the cliff, and out in the marketplace it's really kind of failed. Yes, sir?
I got a second part to that. I don't know if anyone else has noticed it, but if you ever notice that you have DC to daylight S9 signals, and you live in a rural area, there's a thing called a grow house, and these guys use these lamp controllers. There's two types. There's a old-style analog type, magnetic, and there's a new digital type. The digital types will light every band out DC to daylight. When they're on, you know they're on, can't operate anywhere when they're off. You aware of this?
I'm here to
I think I heard he's talking about the grow lamps at the marijuana grow houses.
Oh, yeah, that's actually much more of a problem out here.
I have gone so far as to take a little AM radio to the places that sell these lamps and demonstrate one. Turn that one on, nothing, turn this one on. See the difference? Tell your customers.
Yeah, RF lighting is always a problem. There's two types of RF lighting. There's the Part 18 industrial type that we really don't have anything much to say about, and the Part 15 RF lighting, which we do have a lot to say about because that's not supposed to be causing any interference. But it's a little tricky to go to a grower's place and try to get them to clean it up.
Take SWAT.
I tell them that the FCC is a federal agency. Federal, the feds don't like Santa Cruz County, even though they have some very little attitudes to it. They don't recognize it. So if you point out to these guys, if you want to get along, or you don't like the feds, you get shot or they might help.
If you have some other questions, I'll be happy to answer them later on, but I don't want to take up all the time here today. But did you have a question?
Yeah, Chris, were you made aware of the ham in Southern California who was cited under the cell phone law, but he was operating a mounted 2-meter rig in the car? Have you been made aware of that?
Yeah, I did hear about that, and there are a lot of different flavors of mobile cellular statutes. The more benign ones are the prohibitions of texting specifically, because they tend to be rather specifically defined. The problem with those statutes is that they are very often very broadly stated, and they don't adequately define what constitutes a personal communications device or a wireless communications device, and it tends to include way too much. Some of them will specifically exclude CB radio, but they won't exclude private land mobile radio or or amateur radio in the process. And you go to them and you say, well, you know, you've enacted this statute, but it's vastly overbroad and you don't need to. We do have some things that we can help individual hams with who get tagged with one of these things. And we have not heard about any convictions if there's either a seizure of amateur radio equipment or the equivalent of a traffic citation that's issued. But we did obtain from the, where did we get it from, Bob? Was it the National Highway Traffic Safety?
Yes, NTIA.
Traffic Safety Organization. We have a letter saying that they don't view amateur radio as being a danger to create a distracted driving situation, and that they were satisfied if amateur radio was excluded from these statutes. But the problem is they come up fast and furious in very, very short state legislative sessions, and they tend to pass, you know, at midnight mark things, and then we're saddled with them. So, and I suspect that they're worse in Southern California and probably up here than elsewhere.
Do you know specifically where that case is in the process in Southern Cal?
I don't actually.
I thought that one was the one where the testifying officer did not show up.
That's right.
Yeah, there have not been any convictions at all that we've heard about, but you know, we don't need that kind of harassment at all.
Chris, on that point, I have a copy of a letter from the California Highway Patrol that states specifically that a VHF transceiver is not a cell phone. And if you would like, I will email you a copy of that letter.
Well, that'd be very helpful, yeah. That certainly would. You know, California statute is a rough go. Yeah, Lauren?
The Nevada situation, what about an update on that? With their mobile restrictions?
I don't have that on the top of my head, Lauren. I'm going to have to check into it. I'll be happy to get back to whoever you want. Yeah.
I can speak to that.
Please do.
Hi guys, I'm Joe Gerardo. I'm the Nevada section manager. Yeah, we had a poorly crafted law passed in Nevada. We battled it for quite a while. Actually had numerous meetings with the state Senator Breeden out of Southern California, or Southern Nevada. Little Freudian slip there.